Welcome, Mariah, to Keys to Success.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So let's talk about where you're from.
Okay, where am I from? Well, I guess I would say I am from California.
Okay.
I was born in the Bay Area. I spent most of early childhood in a small rural community, Coosa County, which is in Northern California. And then I moved to Sacramento for junior high and back to the Bay Area for high school and college. I went to grad school in LA and then moved back to Northern California after that. So, California girl.
Right. Cool. Let's talk about, because I read in your bio, it said that you emancipated from foster care at the age of 17 and then ended up graduating from UC Berkeley with the major in on media and cultural representation. What was your...
You've done your research.
Thank you. What was your mindset back then? Like, what were you thinking as a 17-year-old emancipating from foster care? First of all, you were in foster care, and then you decided to emancipate from foster care at the age of 17 and then go on to accomplish what you have. Can you take us through your mindset, what you were thinking at that point in your life?
You're taking me back to the old school. The first word that came to mind when you started that question was survival. But if I go back to like my mindset, being that 17-year-old emancipating, I had actually wanted to emancipate earlier. I'd had several placements with my adult siblings, and God bless them, I so appreciate them for taking me in. When I first went into the system, I went into a receiving home, and then I went into a foster home for like a week, and then I was placed with an adult sibling that I never met, and I subsequently went on to live with two other adult siblings. So, it's awkward, being placed in any family that you didn't, grow up with, that you're not familiar with. I'm thankful that there was that familial love there, and that connection, that family bond that, just wasn't established early, but there was just different challenges in each placement, and there wasn't a lot of stability, especially in terms of, the high school that I was in. I was fortunate that, aside from transferring into Hayward High as a freshman, mid-year, and then having a stint at the end of my junior year where I had to like bounce around and find school in Oakland, that I was at Hayward High for most of my high school years. And so like that was really important in being able to get the classes I needed to be on track to get in, and being able to get like the honors and AP placements. Although at the end of my junior year, I did lose a couple of my AP class placements from, not being able to continue at Hayward for that year. But what I was really looking at then was just like, I was going to school in Hayward and I was living in Oakland. I was commuting a very long way. Plus I was working. And so I wanted more stability and I wanted to be closer to school. I wanted to have more autonomy and just how I lived my life, and just the stress that I was exposed to because I had a lot of things going on. Now, emancipating was still stressful. I had to petition the court, and I can't even, I've forgotten so much of even what that, I just don't think about it that much. I was just focused on moving forward and just trying to make something of my life and having some stability in the future and hope. So that's just what I focused on. And, I had some influences in my life that encouraged and inspired me and gave me some direction. And I just ran with every glimmer of hope and opportunity that was afforded to me. So that's where my mind was at that time. I just wanted to get into, the best school that I could. And, I kind of was raised in the generation of go to the best school you can and get the best job you can. And I had no idea of, what I was going to be exposed to from then on. But that was my mindset at the time.
Wow. That's incredible and powerful, because I'm just thinking, like a lot of people that I know, because I'm 28, and so I can, it's not, as I think about it, a lot of people in that age range, they're not even thinking about anything that you were thinking about at 17, and you put it all together as far as, I want this, this, and this. It seemed like you were so focused. Was your situation a driving factor in you kind of blocking everything out and being focused on what you wanted for your future?
Well, I think it was a couple of things. So I should say this. I'll just go back to freshman year. Okay, so you know what? And I'll go back a little bit farther. When I was growing up in that rural community, it was very racist. Just put it say it like it is. It was like I was called everything but my name. It was very overt. I was definitely the minority. Like my brother and I were the black kids.
Wow.
So, and we're mixed, right? So, I think my brother was an athlete, so he kind of had a crew that he fit in with. But with me, it was like I hung out with kind of like the outcasts, right? And so a lot of my time was in introversion in the books, and I think that afforded me just like a level of, education. I had a library in my home, I was privileged that way.
Right.
So, and I feel like I was, I did well academically, and I kind of fell off track just going through a lot of moving around and some traumas that I had in my life going into foster care and losing my brother at 17. And so like I went off track and it was like world of other things, right? So by the time I was a freshman, I was at risk of literally flunking out of school.
Wow. Wow.
And when I went into foster care, there was like an intervention in the receiving home, and I had to go through like different tests and behavioral assessments. And, I was kind of encouraged to do well academically. And when I met my paternal family, I wanted them to like me. I didn't want to disappoint them. And so I think that so encouraged me to apply myself academically. And I had one sister that was in college and one who exposed me to the CSUS library system to do research on a writing project, and I ended up winning an essay contest. So I had those little like encouragements and information that I mentioned earlier that it inspired me to focus on my education, because again, I was flunking out. Like I was cutting classes, I was hanging out, I was smoking and drinking and doing all things. So it's not like I was some perfect teen. Okay,
right.
I was at all the risks that other kids in foster care are at, but I also did have I think a lot of kids that are in foster care that are brilliant and they don't know it. They've never been allowed to thrive in the way that I had been allowed to in my, and they weren't afforded the same stability or interventions that I was afforded when I did reunite with my paternal family, even those through the foster care system. So I think it was those interventions in my freshman year, particularly, that kind of set that course. And once I saw what it took to get into UC Berkeley, I remember I went on a campus visit with a friend, and as soon as I set foot on campus, I knew that was the school that I wanted to go to, and everything else just kind of confirmed that for me. And researching, the university and the other alternatives. And I just remember like interacting with the students and seeing like, oh, they're cool. They're like me. Like they do the things I do. They like the things I like. Oh, here's the arcade. And here's, what it's like to hang out at the house and, with college students. And so just, I think having those exposures, not only in the formal like tour of the school, but like I toured with the homie, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I saw she lived in Berkeley and she exposed me to students that I could relate to. And so I think that having that kind of gave me, a goal. And once I set my mind on that goal and saw, like, I just reverse engineered, like, what do I need to get there? So at the time, as like a freshman, I was really behind because I was flunking out. So I had to like stay in at lunchtime and talk to teachers like, okay, I'm not getting on how to do this trigonometry thing. Like, can you teach me? Right. And they saw my initiative and that impressed them. So like I had teachers that were biased against me for sure. Like I had this teacher, by the time I was in my senior year, I had gotten into AP statistics. And that was by virtue of literally going to junior college classes in the summer, getting concurrent enrollment forms, and going to junior college in the summer and taking classes. And math was my weakness. Okay. So, but because I did that, I was able to accelerate my track and, get on track for UC Berkeley or for the UC system. Anyway, I had this statistics teacher, and she was my first period class. Now, mind you, by that time I was emancipated. So I was living on my own. I was working 7 days a week. So I'd go to school and I'd get out like at 3 p.m. and I would go to work. And I would work, 3-4 hours. And then I would come home and try to do as much homework as I could. If I didn't finish my homework, then I would do my homework in the morning. And so sometimes I would skip her class, or I would be late to her class because it was my first period class. And I would also be tired. I was tired.
Right.
Since it was tired. I ain't gonna lie. And mind you, I had my fun too. So it's not like I wasn't out, doing my thing or whatever as a teenager. I had fun too. But I would be late to her class sometimes, just trying to get my work done. And so she thought I was a slacker. But she ran into my history teacher in the student lounge, and somehow or another, he told her that I was emancipated. And so all the stereotypes she had about me went out the window. And the next time she saw me, she's like, "Oh my God, Mariah, Mr. Dwyer told me that you were emancipated, and are you okay? It looks like you've lost weight. Are you hungry? Do you need anything?" And her whole attitude towards me changed, and she ended up being like one of my ambassadors and helping me with transitioning into UC Berkeley. So it's not like, I didn't experience bias or whatever, but, I think just reaching out to teachers and being kind of humble or vulnerable enough to ask for help, and like finding some people in my classes that could tutor me, that helped me, to just augment my weaknesses. And, it helped kind of being a new girl too, because I had some people trying to bully me. I almost got jumped one time.
Wow.
So it was like, okay, well, I'm just going to be in the cuts doing my thing and focusing on my future. And I was kind of like, that was just my path. That was my way out of my situation.
Wow, that's incredible. So you go from foster care to emancipating at 17 to graduating from UC Berkeley. What's next?
Yep. So I went from UC Berkeley to straight to grad school at USC for motion picture producing. And that was kind of, by then, I had caught the entrepreneurial bug. I had started my first company around 2001 when I was at Berkeley. I started a boutique production company. And I kind of arrived at that through a couple of other influences. So again, like if I was going to say anything as a takeaway to anybody listening to this, I would say be like, partially intentional and partially just open to serendipity of who you connect with in life, because that has been all the difference in my world, like all of it, everything in my world is of anything amazing about my life by virtue of the people who are in it. Whether it's my daughter, my husband, my coworkers, my peers, it's always the people in my life that make my life wonderful and amazing. So there was two people. One was like a Ghanaian. One was my husband, my now husband. He came here on scholarship from Botswana, which is a country in southern Africa. It's right above South Africa. A very prosperous, peaceful country. And he came here on scholarship for filmmaking. And my family was very much involved in the arts, but I hadn't really been interested in like movies or anything like that until I met him. And he kind of inspired me. At the time, I was like really into social justice and, power to the people and, like marching in the streets before Facebook and Twitter.
Right.
Or like, against the prison industrial complex and all that. So he had, like inspired me to use film as a medium of empowerment. And, like giving a vitamin with the pain pill, so to speak. And that's a place where people of color, and since we're, the California Black Chamber of Commerce here talking, people of color have been opened, have been invited and welcomed into entertainment. We have been allowed to entertain people as minstrels, as comedians, as performers. But what we have not had is ownership of our cultural product. And we have been subject to propaganda. Our cultural product is portrayed to the world in terms of like buffoonery, and to justify our oppressions, so to speak. So I followed Napster in the tech industry, and I felt like that same disruption was going to hit in the film industry, because at that time we were learning fiber optics to have the kind of bandwidth we have now. I'm dating myself, but that was what was going on. We were converting to the adoption of digital media on the like exhibitors and also on the filmmaking side. So you think like Matrix era, like if you know that movie and how groundbreaking it was, that was the era that I was in. So my now husband, had kind of inspired me to look at film in an entrepreneurial perspective. And I had a friend from Ghana, so a lot of African dynamics going on here. And I think there's something to that, and especially in the age of, the post-Black Panther, the movie era, I think there's something to that. But this friend from Ghana was studying to be a stockbroker, books that some stockbrokers had given to him. And among them were Kiyosaki's cash flow. And that was the first time, like, I knew that there were businesses out there in the world that created jobs, but I never thought of being a business owner or an entrepreneur as a job. But after I read that book, I saw it as a means of economic empowerment and economic development with a end of social justice. So that's when I started really getting interested in entrepreneurship, and I decided to like focus it in on the entertainment industry. So I went straight from UC Berkeley into USC, and I transferred to UCLA, and both of those schools I studied motion picture producing, which is the business side of filmmaking.
Wow. And so you served on some entertainment-oriented organizations, Film Independent, the Film Arts Foundation, the Image Awards, Pan-African Film Festival. Did you ever, when you got into that, did you see yourself being a part of that, or how did that come about?
Wow, you are really on it. You know more about me than I know about myself at this point. So when you say, did I see myself being, are you asking, did I see myself being a part of that industry?
Yeah, like when you first entered into the entertainment industry, did you say, okay, I'm here, now I'm going to shoot for this, or did it just happen, like you said, serendipitously? Did it just all start coming to you?
That's a great question. I was very intentional at that point about like wanting to get into the entertainment industry and get in at the highest level that I could. So I think my life has, like, my life decisions have kind of been like this. Where can I have the most impact? Based on the information that I have, where can I use my life, my privilege to have the most impact? And I think part of that is because I'm an empath. I feel things. I feel people. It's like, I think as a people, we're more empathetic than most. Like in USC, the term that they would use to describe Black people was soulful. Oh, that was soulful. So I kept on hearing people say, oh, yes, it was. And yeah, this picture is very soulful. And I started realizing, okay, soulful is basically Hollywood code for Black. So, we soulful, right? Like, we tend to feel like when we say, you feel me, it's like we tend to be more feeling, and I am just like, true, like I'm an empath. And like when things are just harmonious in the world and people are suffering, like I feel it. Like I'm not happy if people are suffering. So I'm not the kind of person like I gotta be all that and have the best this and that and whatever. I'm not gonna be happy if my neighbor is suffering. Like I'm gonna be like, okay, how can I lift you up too? So that's just my mindset. And I know I'm rare. I'm like an INFJ, it's like 1% of the population. But like MLK, Mother Teresa, that is my pathology.
Wow.
So my mindset was like, okay, these people have had this impact on my life, and this is how it felt to me. This is what it did for me. And then I had a couple of little micro experiences where I had impact on others, and that was like, damn, excuse my language, but that's my drug of choice. Like, that gave me so much joy to be able to, a young woman who was apathetic and discouraged and feeling like her school wasn't teaching her anything, and being able to have like a real heart-to-heart conversation and encourage her, and run into her 3 months later and have her hug me and tell me I didn't know I could go to college while I was in high school, and now I'm in a program at CSUS. Right. Like seeing her change from being apathetic to hopeful, or seeing like, just communities come together, or see a young man whose main ambition was to be a shot caller in his Compton gang call me and tell me and my husband that after this 12-week art therapy program he was in, that now he wants to, now he's enrolled in college. Like those were the things that just, like, they did, like I said, that was my drug of choice. So my decision making has always been like, where can I use my life to have the most impact? So was intentional in wanting to go to USC and get into the motion picture industry, so I could see like the who's who, the creme de la creme, the top of the line of the motion picture industry. And I've always looked at how high can I go to open doors for others. And I can't say that those doors have always just like opened for me. I've had doors slammed in my face. I've been humiliated. I've been rejected. I've suffered it all. But, you know, I've learned so much and gained so much. And so, like, yeah, I went into the motion picture industry not so much like I want to be like a director or the top producer in Hollywood. It was more like, how can I empower filmmakers? How can I empower not only my people, but all people to better understand each other through the stories we tell, because stories have been shown to build empathy. So that was like my intention there. And then I also saw the economic aspect, because motion pictures are such a huge export of the U.S. Economy and such a huge part of how we're perceived around the world. It's part of our soft power. And so I definitely saw economic opportunity and cultural influence as something that I could, you know, understand better by virtue of being in that world.
Wow. So you're doing all this, and then you found time to get a professional designation in financial planning and securities. How did that come? What made you, like, where did you find time to do that, and what was that specifically?
Yeah, it's a good question. Wow. So I'll be honest, the way that came about, you know, you might think it was like tied to my friend, is it like training to be a stockbroker or something like that? But actually, the way that came about was I was privileged in that, like I mentioned earlier, that I'm mixed, right? So my mother was actually disabled, and that's part of how I ended up in foster care. But her mother, you know, cancer survived cancer 5 times. But she was like the matriarch of the family. 8th grade education, you know, West Virginia white woman, came cross country with my grandfather, who fought in World War II and settled in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Had my mom, only child. And she left me a trust. And that, it was an educational trust. As I said, she had an 8th grade education, and her main ambition for me was to see me go to college. And I went to college on my own, you know, checked on the debt, you know, worked my way through. But when she passed away, she left a trust that enabled me to do my first year of grad school without having to work. So I did that. I honored her wishes in that regard. But then my second year of grad school, I had to figure it out. So I was working full time at the Capital Group. I was temping, and, you know, I worked at the Film Independent on a year I had off while I was transferring over to UCLA. But while at UCLA, I was working at the Capital Group, which, you know, was also in the financial industry. But I saw like an ad in the paper, you know, about jobs in the financial industry, and I could get started right away, originating loans and trained to get into financial planning, essentially, and get my securities licenses. So did that in much the way that I started my boutique production company as an undergrad, because I was working 20 and 30 hours while going to school. And starting my production company allowed me to be able to do like some commercials or videos or, you know, small projects where I could work a fraction of the time that I had to work, you know, my freshman and sophomore and part of my junior year by like just doing these gigs. And that freed me up to be able to take on the internships and apply to the, you know, to take the GRE and apply to grad school. So like once I got to LA, I really couldn't compete with a production company in that ecosystem. But, you know, I got into the financial industry so that, like, if I closed a loan or two, I wouldn't have to work the 40 hours that I was working at the Capital Group. So that's how I ended up getting into work from 7 to 4 and then go to class from 6 to 10 and have, you know, a 2-hour, you know, commute per day, like to and from school. You know, fortunately, my now husband he would drive me so that I could do my homework in the car. I blew out many fuses, plugging my laptop in to the little adapter. But, you know, I wanted to have more time to dedicate to my education and to pay my way through school. So that's how I got into the financial industry.
Wow.
which I quickly exited out of because if you look at the timeline there, 2008 happened just a couple years after I got my licenses, and so I had actually exited. I saw the writing on the wall, meeting with families, and just seeing it. It didn't take a Big Short. If you've seen the movie The Big Short, it didn't take a spreadsheet for me to figure out what was going on with people being upside down, and all the little dynamics that are another discussion for another day. I saw what was happening, and I didn't have the network of like high net worth, people in my circle to sustain me through that economic crisis. So by 2007, I exited and I started actually teaching for the Art Institute in Sacramento.
Wow. Okay, and so are you still currently involved in venture capital or no?
Yeah, no, so like that was totally separate from venture capital. I didn't, I kind of knew what venture capital was because, going back to undergrad at UC Berkeley in the Napster era, that was the .com boom and bust, so I saw all of that happening, and I knew that there was like venture capital involved there, but, and I was like actually pretty technical at the time. I wasn't doing a tech startup. As I mentioned, I had a boutique firm, but film in and of itself is pretty technical. You have to learn, different software, and I was an early adopter of a lot of the early SaaS companies, that software as a service, and I had learned like HTML. CSS wasn't yet at that time, but I had started learning to code. I had built like new websites and e-commerce. It was like way before its time, like trying to sell movies online and stuff like that. So I had already kind of been involved in tech, but when I was in the financial industry, as a FINRA licensed professional, that was more like, consulting families and small businesses on the financial planning, which is totally different from venture capital, where you're like, raising capital and deploying it in companies and whatnot. So that was a whole other, I knew that I wanted to be involved in that, even in the film industry. When I said I wanted to be able to empower filmmakers, part of the reason why I went into the producing program was to, I already knew that I wanted to produce. I wanted to have a, production company, or even beyond that, I wanted to have film funds that I could deploy into filmmakers. So that's kind of like, fast forward into around 2012 when I started getting back into the film industry, and I think it was around 2014 I started getting back into tech. That's really when I started exploring venture capital, and that was really through taking some classes with the Kauffman Fellows Academy, and it was like right after my mom had passed away. It's like 2013, and the Jobs Act had come out in 2012. They were still, making all the rules. And if you don't know what the Jobs Act is, it's under Obama administration. It basically was game changing, and what it did was, before the Jobs Act, if you learn the Securities and Exchange Commission rules, the Blue Sky rules, they're all interrelated, but those are securities laws, right? And so I had to be tested on securities law. So I was kind of familiar with that. So when the Jobs Act came out, actually when I was in the financial industry, one of the things that, makers are raising money illegally, left and right. So I knew that when I went into financial planning, I was like, oh wow, this is really relevant to my industry, because filmmakers don't know that they're breaking law when they're raising money. A lot of them, not all of them. And back then, after Enron and everything, it was really hard to get like securities attorneys. People were risk averse. So fast forward, Jobs Act space changed it. When you're raising money, it used to be you could only raise money from your professional network. So if you didn't already have a professional relationship with someone, you couldn't raise money. So what does that mean? That means if you poor and you ain't got rich people in your network,
right?
That's what it meant.
Right.
So you're dependent on like serendipitously making some connection, going back to that whole network thing, right? Who you're connected to, who you interact with. You're basically you have to hustle into your network to find somebody who's a money person, right? So the Jobs Act changed that it opened it up to where you didn't have to only raise money from your own personal network, and part of that was in what's called the general solicitation provision. So now under the Jobs Act, you can actually raise money. You can advertise your venture on TV, on the radio, on a billboard, any kind of way, but you can only raise money from accredited investors. And what does that mean? Accredited investors are people who make individually $200,000 a year or more, or as a couple $300,000 a year or more, $300,000 a year or more, and have made that for the past 2 years, or they have a net worth of over $1 million, excluding their primary residence as of laws that were enacted around 1985 or so. So, I was paying attention to these laws. And why is this important? And especially in the context of us as the people and people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. When you look at when these laws were written and came out, we're talking about the Investment Act and I forget time, but there's a couple of securities laws that basically came out like in the 30s and 40s. I think one is 1944, one is 1930. So this is post, stock market crash. And this is an era where, we're post-Reconstruction, Black communities are building, communities of color are building, we're still under segregation. You see the Black Wall Streets, right? You've got a movement of Black Wall Streets being destroyed across the country. And so I think that part of those laws, when we really research them, designed to contain the economic power of communities by restricting who could invest in different ventures. That's my interpretation of the laws. So that changed that in a way, but it didn't go really far enough. And it also opened up crowdfunding. So I got back into tech by virtue of this Hoffman Society and trying to seize on the changes that the Jobs Act had opened up and applying those to, my own startup, which is in the motion picture space. So I started this company, CINESHARES, which is still active now, and the whole purpose was really to democratize access to capital for entertainment-related companies and for filmmakers, and to leverage the new laws that came out of that. So while I was going through these this program, the Kaufman Fellows Academy, taking online classes to basically validate my dream and my idea, I met some people, and one in particular, Rusty Dornan, she kind of took a liking to me, saw my activity in the program, and encouraged me, after some conversation where I told her, look, I'm really interested in economic development. I'm really interested in venture capital at large. I see CINESHARES as venture capital for the entertainment industry, but, I'm interested in, larger economic empowerment through venture capital. And she said, you should really apply to the Kaufman Fellows Society, which is like next generation. It's a book program of entrepreneur-friendly capitalists. And so I did so. It was like applying to grad school, the whole like letters of recommendation, transcripts, interviews, like the whole shebang, a whole bunch of like questions and essays. And I was accepted as a finalist. And basically what that did was it opened me up to a network of capitalists that I developed relationships with. And that's how I got involved with the Founder Institute, which I went through as a founder with my company, CINESHARES. I was a female founder fellow. I ended up graduating from that program, and only 30% of participants, a little bit more than that now, tend to graduate from that program. And now I've launched the Sacramento chapter, where I work with early stage founders in accelerating their companies. So I got into venture capital in that way. It was, certainly the financial industry experience I had before influenced that journey, as part of that journey. But yeah, that's something that I'm active in now. And I'm actually like, I know we had discussed this previously, but right now what I'm doing, I'm on a bit of a hiatus. I'm still doing that, but I'm currently in a policy hub. And so they're, tech experts learn the policy process, and we produce policy outputs for this 10-week program. So I've just honed in one of the, we all work on 2 projects. And so in this next 6 weeks, I'll be working on a project to help, it's called Power to People, one of them. And that's to help underrepresented populations be more active in the civic process, in policy making process. And then the other project is about closing the early stage funding gap. And so, yes, I am still very active in venture capital space now.
Wow, that's very interesting, because I don't know if you know, but the California Black Chamber of Commerce is very active in legislation and policy. So maybe there would be a way that we can partner on that. That's some questions I have to ask after the interview, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, I would love to discuss further. Even, beyond this, have certain like parameters. We don't do any lobbying. We're nonpartisan, and so we did our whole ethics class. And I think I does good. through an ethics class, and then I have a better idea of what projects I was going to work on and what we could discuss today. I'm really pleased with the like unconventional. I don't normally get to talk about the things that you asked about today, so I'm actually pleased with that. But yeah, I'd be happy to discuss not only what we're in this program, but now that I am being enlightened and informed and empowered as to policy, what can be done in the future beyond the program.
Perfect. So a question that I have for you: is it difficult to be a woman in the venture capitalist field?
Yes.
And what
yes.
Can you explain some of the pitfalls or maybe roadblocks that are involved?
Well, I'll say this. I think on the one hand, there's being a woman in venture capital, right? And on the other hand, there's being a Black person in venture capital, right? And then there's the intersectionality of being a Black woman in venture capital. And if you want to really layer it on, being a multi-ethnic woman in venture capital, like, is probably a thing. And then also, like, being a Black American woman, as opposed to, say, like, an African woman, which, if you look at, the people who are involved in tech, Black people who are involved in tech, I would say that Africans over-index in terms of Black representation in tech, compared to, like, African Americans, and there's different dynamics at play with that. There, I'm sure, can be just explored, and we touched on the diaspora earlier. So I just think, like, just the obvious things. We've seen the Me Too movement come out over the past couple of years, and some validation of that women have been experiencing. We've seen, with this current administration, some, dynamic that validated the fact that we're not going still issues, and I think technology has them out, because the levers that used to be used to population aren't so easy to pull anymore when we have platforms that can amplify messages. And so a lot of dynamics at play that I think we've seen. So being a woman of color, I think this is a great time to blaze trails, so to speak. But, when you look at things like, I like to cite Richard Kirby, because I think his company is Equal Ventures. He's a venture capitalist. He spun out from, where was he before? It'll come to me. But anyway, he did a report called Who is a VC? And he followed that up with Where did you go to school? And that basically broke down the data of, like, the gender and ethnic dynamics of venture capitalists. And Where did you go to school? Basically shows that 40% of venture capitalists come out of Stanford or Harvard. I did try to get into Stanford, just did not get in. But that is the mafia of the West Coast, and Harvard on the East Coast of venture capital. And then there's, like, a handful of other schools that are, the over-index. And most venture capitalists are, not operators. They're not engineers. So, like, the main way that people get into venture capital is by virtue of network. So, as a woman and a person of color, you're less likely to be exposed or accepted or, just otherwise in those networks. So, like, it's not like there's not, exceptions, and there's not, like, I think it's MLT4, I forget the name of the program, but there's basically a couple of programs that track people of color into MBA programs, and some VCs are tapping into associates out of those programs, and that's wonderful. But those kind of become, like, the source of talent of color, right? Like, and then other people don't have equitable opportunities. And it's kind of the same. Like, we had a speaker come into the Ask Me Tech Policy Hub last week from Code 2040, and she was talking about, like, the same dynamic of, like, tech companies said, okay, well, the source are, talent of color from this program, and it kind of became like an elitist source. And so, like, you have, like, these certain tracks that will get you in by virtue of network. And so I think, like, when it comes to being a woman or a person of color, like, there's less than 1% of venture capitalists are Black women. Like, that's current statistic from Richard Kirby's report. And then you look at like Project Diane from Catherine Finney, and she was like the first person to really do this on Black women in tech entrepreneurship. And when she came out with that report, which I think was in 2016, there were 13 Black women who had raised over $1 million in venture capital. Now that number has gone up. I don't know. It's probably over 40, 50, 60 now. I don't know. But at that time, that's what it was. And this is before Joelle Burke. Maybe she had just sold her company to Amazon. People like Stephanie Lampkin, Macy, I forget her last name, but she's the CEO on Second Thought. Like, all of these dynamic, amazing Black women are out here. They're qualified. They're doing all the things. They're checking the boxes, and they're not getting funding. You know, I talked to the first institutional investor into Joelle Burke's company, PartPick, which again sold to Amazon. And he said, we tracked her for 3 years. She's winning all of these pitch competitions. She was at TechCrunch, but she wasn't getting funded. So these are like, this is a function of bias, right? It's not like a function of not being qualified, you know? And so like going back, there are people in venture capital, like I think of the Marlon Nichols, I think of, you know, Mercedes-Benz. It just became, I think, the first Black partner at Greylock. I might be misquoting, so I apologize if I'm getting that wrong. But definitely, like, Mercedes checks all of the boxes, right? Like, and she's amazing, and you know, like, more power to her. Then you have like outliers like Arlen Hamilton, who like was very transparent about being temporarily homeless and, you know, like living out of the airport while she was raising her first $5 million fund. And she doesn't have like a college education, but she just hustled her way into the field. And I think that those are like inspirations that show us like what can be. And we look at like going back to, you know, Black women in entrepreneurship, you look at like the number of Black women who have had successful exits compared to their numbers being funded. I mean, like, if you just look at those statistics, like, you should only invest in Black women. You know, we are going to, like, you know, look at the ratio of exits to, like, funding, then it would be, like, only invest in Black women. So, like, there's definitely bias at play that is causing inequitable, you know, access to capital, inequitable opportunity. And so in that sense, yeah, it's difficult. But I think what's exciting is that we do get to blaze those trails. We do get to kick down doors. We do get to build the coalitions. We do get to, you know, create a better, you know, more equitable and just society, which is part of what the Aspen Institute does and why I'm here and why I'm working to shape policy. So, you know, it's definitely challenging, but it's also what it inspires me and wakes me up in the morning. It's like part of the impact that I want to have in the world. So, yeah.
Wow. This next question is kind of vague because you're involved in a lot of different business fields, but I guess I can just ask you, what is your outlook on the most important trend in any of the business fields that you're in?
Well, I will say something that I'm super passionate about. Like, you know, going back to the previous question momentarily, I walk in a room, people see a moment, you know, and they just assume, oh, you're, you know, and especially they hear DiverseCity Ventures, and some people get double or triple under that's in that. But, you know, most people think, oh, you're about women and people of color. And like, yeah, I'm all about women and people of color. I love women, I love people of color, but I love everybody. Right. And I think one of the fields that affects us all, like, I know, like one of the areas of technology that affects us all is clean tech. And so that's an area that really blend, and I'd like to see more venture capitalists get active in. There's another team here in the tech policy on clean tech adoption, and we'll see how that evolves. I'm not going to tell their story, but you know, what has been not discouraging, but like disappointing, I would say, is like I've been on the tech advisory committee for CalSeed, which is a $24 million fund that funds early stage companies that benefit California ratepayers in the energy sector. And you know, we've had a couple of amazing exits, even out of like just being around for 3 years. And you know, it's disappointing that more venture capitalists have not taken an interest in this area that impacts the whole friggin' planet. Like, if we can't get global warming control, can't get change under control, you know, like, who cares about the next, photo app or the next, food delivery app?
Right.
Not to disparage those founders or what they do. I appreciate, Postmates as much as anybody else, or DoorDash as much as anybody else. But like, we need clean air. We need, like, to not have our cities flooded and, to have mass refugee crisis because of climate change displacement. So in that regard, as it pertains to, your constituents and demographic, I would say I would love to see more people of color involved in that movement. And, there are people of color that are hidden figures in the movement, and they're going to be like, this is Black History Month, when we, tout all of the, Black inventors who are known and whatnot. And I blast those out every year. But, there's so many people that are in technology that are hidden figures, and there's some that are in clean tech, but there's not enough. And climate change and clean tech impacts our communities more so than others. It disproportionately affects rural communities and low-income communities. And so, it's an area where we definitely need to be at the table and have a voice. So I'll say that is major. Next to that, I would probably say fintech, and just like banking the unbanked, and like, just leveling the playing field, and creating more pathways to economic empowerment. Where policy comes into play, I'm very much interested in changing those dynamics around accredited investor status, and looking at, like, how can we have a bipartisan discussion on creating pathways to allow people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged to participate in the startup ecosystem more equitably, beyond the limitations that are involved in crowdfunding right now, which is like which is the only possible realm for non-accredited investors to invest in early stage tech companies. So those are some of the things that I'm super interested in and passionate about in the field that I'm in.